Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. It started out as just a job. Nothing special. Just something to pay the bills while I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my life. I never thought it would turn into this. My name's Braylee Shepard. I'm 25, and a few months ago, I started working part-time at Meadow Ridge Nursing Home. It's quiet, a little boring, but it's steady. The kind of place where most days feel the same, and honestly, that was fine by me. I wasn't looking for excitement. I'd just come out of a relationship that lasted way too long. Finley, my ex, wasn't a bad guy. We just stopped working. Everything felt routine, like we were roommates instead of a couple. I needed space. I needed something new. When I got the job at Meadow Ridge, I told myself it was just temporary. I didn't want to get too attached to anything, or anyone. But then I met Elle Morrison. Elle's the head admin, basically, the boss of everyone who works there. She's 37, always looks put together, and has this way of making people feel like they matter. Even people like me, who barely had their life together. She's one of those people who walks into a room and owns it without even trying. Confident. Sharp. But warm, too. At first, she was just my boss. Someone I respected. Someone I wanted to impress. But that changed, fast. It started with little things. She'd always make time to chat during lunch or ask how I was doing. She remembered the small stuff, like the fact that I hated tomatoes or that my car was acting up. She actually cared, or at least, she made it feel like she did. Then, one Friday, we were in the break room eating lunch, and out of nowhere, she says, "I saw your post." I froze for a second, trying to figure out what she meant. And then it hit me. I'd come out as bisexual on Facebook a few weeks earlier. It wasn't a big post or anything, just something I felt like I needed to get off my chest. But hearing her bring it up, I didn't know what to say. "Oh, yeah," I mumbled. "Guess the secret's out." She smiled, this soft, understanding smile that made me feel like I could breathe again. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That takes guts." And then, like it was nothing, she told me she was part of the LGBT community too. Just like that. I remember sitting there, staring at her, trying to process what she'd just said. She wasn't bragging or anything. She was just sharing. That was the moment things shifted. After that, we started talking more about everything. Relationships, life, stupid things that happened at work. I looked forward to our lunch breaks more than I should have. I'd catch myself glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until we'd get to sit in the break room together. I told myself it was harmless. That it was just nice having someone to talk to. But then she added me on Snapchat. I didn't think much of it at first. People add each other all the time, right? But it didn't take long for things to start feeling different. We'd snap each other every day. Nothing serious at first, just funny faces, pictures of food, random stuff. But then she started complimenting me. Saying I looked good in my selfies. That my hair looked nice. Stuff like that. And I ate it up. I started sending her snaps where I looked better. Fixed my hair, adjusted my top, just enough to get her attention. And it worked. She noticed. She started saying things like, "Well, smiling face with heart eyes," and "You're seriously gorgeous." And I liked it. God, I liked it so much. But then it started bleeding into work. She'd walk by me and let her hand brush my arm. Or stand just a little too close when we were looking at the same clipboard. And I'd feel it, the tension. I know she felt it too. The first time it really crossed the line was after my shift one Saturday. Everyone else had left, and it was just the two of us in her office. She asked me to stay and go over some paperwork, but when I got up to leave, she asked for a hug. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse and walked out. But I didn't. When I hugged her, her hand slid low, so low I felt her fingers brush against my ass. She held on too long, and when I started to pull away, she didn't let me go. Instead, she kissed my cheek. Once. Twice. And then a third time, but this one? It was closer. Too close. By the time she actually kissed me, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. And then her hand slid lower, and before I knew it, we were making out in her office, like a couple of teenagers. When we finally stopped, she pushed me away, mumbled something about needing to lock up, and left the room. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel and trying to make sense of what just happened. But the worst part? I didn't feel guilty. I felt excited. And that scared the hell out of me. By the way, if you've made it this far into the story, thank you for sticking with me. I know it's not an easy thing to hear, and I appreciate you listening. If you're finding this video interesting, or if you think there's someone who could relate to what I'm sharing, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing stories like this, and lets me know I'm not alone out here. Alright, let's get back to it. The next Friday, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The kiss. Her hands. The way my body reacted even though every part of my brain was screaming at me to stop. I told myself it was just a one-time thing, heat of the moment, bad judgment. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. And I think Elle knew it too. When I showed up for my shift, everything felt normal, at least at first. She didn't act weird or avoid me. If anything, she seemed even more relaxed. Smiling, laughing, brushing against me whenever she had the chance. And every time she touched me, I felt it all over again. I tried to keep my distance. I really did. But then lunchtime rolled around, and we ended up in the break room, just the two of us, like always. She was leaning against the counter, sipping her coffee, and I couldn't stop staring. Her shirt was unbuttoned just enough to show a hint of skin, and her nails, those damn red nails, drummed softly against her cup. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head like she already knew I wasn't. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah. Just tired." She didn't buy it. I could tell. But she didn't push either. Instead, she waited until I sat down, then slid into the chair across from me. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and suddenly, the whole room felt smaller. About the other night, her voice was softer now, almost careful. "You good?" I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, I wasn't good. I was a mess. And the way she was looking at me wasn't helping. Before I could answer, she reached across the table and brushed her fingers against my hand. It was light, barely there, but it was enough to send a shiver straight down my spine. "You don't have to be scared," she said. "I get it." And maybe that was the problem. She did get it. She knew exactly how to keep me coming back. That was the first time we took our smoke break. I don't even smoke, but when she asked me to go outside with her, I didn't hesitate. We walked out to my car, and as soon as the doors shut, it was like something snapped. She leaned in fast, no hesitation this time, and kissed me hard. Her hands were everywhere, and mine were too. I didn't care that we were in a parking lot. I didn't care that anyone could have walked by and seen us. All I cared about was the way she made me feel, wanted, reckless, alive. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. She tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and grinned like she'd just won a prize. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. That became our routine. Every Friday and Saturday, we'd sneak out to my car, make out for a few minutes, and then head back inside like nothing happened. It felt dangerous and exciting, and I told myself it wasn't a big deal, because we weren't actually doing anything, at least, nothing past kissing. But it didn't take long for things to start feeling different. The way she looked at me lingered longer. the touches got bolder. And the things she said on Snapchat? Let's just say they weren't exactly subtle anymore. Part of me kept waiting for the guilt to hit, for something to snap me out of it. But it never did. If anything, I wanted more. And I could tell she did too. The problem was, it didn't stop at work. One night, I was lying in bed scrolling through Snapchat when Elle sent me a picture. Nothing crazy, just her sitting on her couch with a glass of wine. But the caption? Wish you were here. I stared at it for way too long, debating whether I should respond. And before I even realized what I was doing, I sent her a selfie. Nothing special, but my shirt was low enough to show just a little bit more than it should have. Her reply came almost instantly. Damn. That's all she said. Just one word. But it was enough to make my stomach flip. And then she followed it up with, I'm seriously trying not to think about you right now. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to shut it down, to remind her that she was my boss and this was insane. But the other part? The part that couldn't stop craving her attention? That part wanted to keep going. So I did. And that's when things really started to spiral. By the next weekend, the tension was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every brush of her hand against mine, it all felt heavier, like we were daring each other to take things further. And I hated how much I wanted it. That Friday, she didn't wait until lunch to find me. I was restocking supplies in the storage room when she walked in, shut the door behind her, and leaned back against it. Her eyes didn't leave mine. I can't stop thinking about you, she said, her voice low, but steady. It's messing with my head. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she'd hear it. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but before I could, she crossed the room and kissed me. Not like before. This wasn't careful or hesitant. This was desperate. Like she'd been holding back for too long and couldn't do it anymore. I should have pulled away. I knew that. But instead, I kissed her back. Her hands were on my waist, pulling me closer, and I could feel how much she wanted this, wanted me. And I wanted her too. I wanted her so badly, it scared me. We didn't go all the way, not that time. But the way she touched me, the way her lips felt against my neck, it didn't leave much to the imagination. By the time we finally pulled apart, both of us were out of breath, and my legs were shaking. We can't keep doing this, I whispered, even though I didn't mean it. Then tell me to stop. She was so close I could feel her breath against my skin. If you want me to stop, I will. I didn't say anything. And she didn't stop. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. My hands were shaking when I tried to write out reports. I avoided eye contact with everyone, terrified they'd somehow know what I'd done. But Elle? She was completely calm. Professional. Like nothing had happened. Except it had. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. By lunch, I was a mess. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from her, but nothing came. And then, just as I was about to head to the break room, she caught my arm and pulled me into her office. Lock the door, she said. I did. And then it happened again. It wasn't just the physical stuff that messed with my head. It was everything else, too. The way she'd look at me during meetings. The way she'd text me late at night like she couldn't sleep unless she talked to me first. The way she made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered when we were alone. But then there were the moments when it hit me, what we were doing, what it meant. She had a life outside of work. Friends, responsibilities. Hell, she had an actual girlfriend, though she never talked about her. And me? I had nothing. No excuses. No one to disappoint but myself. I told myself it wasn't serious. That it was just a fling, something I'd laugh about later. But every time I tried to convince myself to end it, she'd pull me back in with a glance, a touch, a text that made my stomach flip. And then, one night, everything changed. I was home, sitting on my couch and scrolling through my phone, when Finley called. I stared at his name on the screen, debating whether to answer. It had been months since we talked, and the last thing I wanted was to hear his voice when I was already feeling guilty. But I picked up anyway. He was drunk. I could tell right away from the slur in his voice. And he wasn't calling to check in, he was calling to tell me he missed me. That he'd made a mistake letting me go. That he still thought about me every day. And for a second, I almost believed him. I almost let myself imagine what it would be like to go back. To fix what we'd broken. But then Elle's name popped up on my screen, right there, in the middle of his apology. I didn't even hesitate. I told him I had to go and hung up before he could say anything else. And then I opened Elle's snap. It was just a picture of her lying in bed, but the caption said everything. Can't stop thinking about earlier. And just like that, Finley was gone. Out of my head, out of my heart. And all I could think about was her. I don't know when it stopped feeling wrong. Maybe it never did. Maybe I just got used to it. But I do know this. Once we crossed that line, there was no going back. By the next week, I stopped trying to talk myself out of it. Every Friday and Saturday, it was the same. Lunch together. Flirty comments. Smoke breaks in my car that always ended with her lips on mine, her hands under my shirt, and me forgetting where I was or what time it was. It was reckless. Stupid. But it felt too good to stop. And honestly, I didn't want to. At work, we kept things professional, most of the time. But sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd brush her fingers against my arm or lean just a little too close, and I'd feel that same rush all over again. It was addictive, and I couldn't get enough. The worst part? No one suspected a thing. Not the other nurses, not the residents, no one. Well, almost no one. Nico Arnold was the first to notice something was off. He wasn't nosy, but he had this way of picking up on things other people missed. And one afternoon, as I was coming back inside from one of our breaks, he cornered me in the hallway. "You and Elle seem close," he said, leaning against the wall like he wasn't accusing me of anything. "Everything okay?" I laughed it off, but my heart was racing. "We're coworkers," I said. "That's all." "Uh-huh." He didn't look convinced. "Just be careful." I should have listened. I should have taken that as a sign to slow down or stop completely. But instead, I ignored it. And things kept getting more intense. It wasn't just the physical stuff anymore. Elle started texting me at all hours, sometimes about work, but mostly not. She'd ask what I was wearing, what I was thinking about. She sent pictures, some innocent, some less innocent. And I sent them back. It was fun at first. A game. But then I started to notice things, like how she'd get jealous if I mentioned hanging out with other people. Or how she'd get quiet and distant if I didn't text back fast enough. It didn't feel like a fling anymore. It felt bigger. Messier. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. But I couldn't walk away. The night everything blew up, it started like any other shift. I clocked in, grabbed my clipboard, and tried to focus on my work. But Elle was everywhere, texting me, finding excuses to pull me aside, brushing against me every chance she got. By the time lunch rolled around, I was already on edge. So when she asked me to take a smoke break, I didn't even hesitate. We slipped out to my car, and as soon as the doors shut, she was on me. This time, it wasn't just kissing. Her hands were in my hair, tugging. Mine were under her shirt. It was fast and messy, and for a minute, it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. Until Nico knocked on the window. I froze. Elle jumped back so fast she hit her head on the roof. I scrambled to fix my shirt while she tried to roll down the window without looking guilty. But it was too late. He'd seen enough. "You're needed inside," he said, his voice flat. Then he turned and walked away. Elle didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at her hands like they didn't belong to her. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt sick. After that, everything changed. Nico didn't say anything to anyone, at least not right away. But the way he looked at me after that? It was worse than if he'd just called me out. I started avoiding him, which only made things more obvious. Elle got weird too. She stopped texting as much and barely looked at me when we were at work. I told myself it was for the best, that it was what I wanted. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like waiting for something to explode. And it did. One night, about a week after Nico caught us, Elle showed up at my apartment. No warning. No text. Just knocked on my door like it was normal. When I opened it, she was crying. I'd never seen her cry before, and it freaked me out. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. She just pushed past me and sat down on the couch. I can't do this anymore, she said, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. I can't keep pretending like this doesn't mean anything. And just like that, the walls I'd built around myself crumbled. I sat down next to her, and before I knew it, we were kissing again. It was different this time, desperate, almost like we were trying to convince ourselves that it wasn't a mistake. But the truth was starting to catch up with us. The next morning, she left without saying much. Just a quick kiss and a promise to text me later. But when I got to work, I knew something was wrong. People were staring. Whispering. Nico wouldn't even look at me. And then I saw Elle in her office, doors shut, blinds closed. That's when it hit me. Someone knew. I knew it was over before she even said anything. The look on Elle's face when she finally called me into her office said it all. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying, but she still sat there, straight-backed, pretending to be in control. The worst part? She wouldn't look at me. I sat down without saying a word, waiting for her to speak. But when she finally did, her voice barely sounded like hers. Someone filed a complaint. My stomach dropped. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. About us, she added, her voice lower now, almost like she didn't want to say it out loud. About what's been going on. I wanted to ask who it was. I wanted to deny everything. But all I could manage was, what happens now? She finally looked at me then. And I saw it, the panic she was trying so hard to hide. The fear. I don't know. That was the last normal conversation we had. After that, everything spiraled. HR got involved. They pulled me into a meeting, asked me if I felt unsafe at work, if I wanted to report any inappropriate behavior. I lied. I said no. I said Elle had always been professional, that we had a good working relationship and nothing more. I thought it would fix things, that it would make the whole situation go away. But it didn't. If anything, it made things worse. Elle stopped talking to me completely. No texts. No Snapchats. Nothing. At work, she barely looked at me, and when she did, it was like she didn't even recognize me. I hated it. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the guilt. I started replaying everything in my head, every kiss, every touch, every moment I let myself believe this was harmless. I told myself it wasn't serious, that it was just fun, but now? Now I wasn't so sure. I kept thinking about Finley, about the way I left him without even trying to fix what we had. And then I'd think about Elle and how much I wanted her even when I knew I shouldn't. It was like I couldn't stop ruining things, no matter how hard I tried. And then came the rumors. Nico must have said something, because people started looking at me differently. Whispering when I walked by. Staring at me like they knew. One day, I overheard two nurses talking in the break room. I heard she hooked up with Elle in the parking lot. No way. Swear to God. That's why she's been acting so weird. I should have walked away, but instead, I stood there and let their words sink in. They didn't know the half of it, and that made it worse. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Elle called me into her office again, but this time, she didn't sit down. She just stood there, staring at the wall like she couldn't even face me. "I'm leaving," she said finally. I blinked. "What?" "I can't stay here," she said. "Not after this. Not with everything." I couldn't breathe. "You're quitting?" She nodded, still not looking at me. "I don't have a choice." And just like that, it was over. The day Elle packed up her office, I thought about saying something, anything. But what was I supposed to say? That I was sorry? That I wanted her to stay? That I wasn't ready for this to end? None of it felt right, so I said nothing. I just watched her walk out the door like she'd never been there at all. For the first time in weeks, my phone was silent. No texts. No snaps. Nothing. I kept expecting her to reach out, to find some excuse to talk to me. But she didn't. And after a while, I stopped expecting her to. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about her. It was about me. About the way I kept chasing things that were bad for me. About how I let myself fall into situations I couldn't handle, then acted surprised when everything fell apart. I thought about calling Finley, about telling him I made a mistake, that I wanted to try again. But every time I picked up the phone, I stopped myself. Because the truth? I didn't miss him. Not really. I missed the idea of him, the safety, the predictability. But I didn't want to go back. Not to him. Not to anyone. What I wanted, what I needed, was to figure out why I couldn't stop ruining things. Why I kept looking for distractions instead of facing the parts of myself I didn't like. It's been 3 weeks since Elle left. People still talk about it sometimes, but the whispers are dying down. And me? I'm still here. Still trying to make sense of everything. Sometimes, I think about texting her. Just to see how she's doing. But I never do. Because part of me knows that if she answers, I won't be able to stop myself. And I can't go through that again. I thought losing Elle would hurt more. But it wasn't the sharp, unbearable kind of pain I expected. It was dull. Lingering. The kind of ache that fades just enough to trick you into thinking you're fine, until something brings it back. Like the smell of her perfume still clinging to the chair in her old office. Or the way my phone buzzed one night, and for a split second, I thought it was her. But it wasn't. It never was. Work didn't feel the same after she left. The energy in the building shifted. People stopped whispering, but the way they looked at me hadn't changed. It was subtle, pity mixed with judgment. Like they knew something happened but weren't sure how much, and they didn't want to ask. Nico barely spoke to me anymore. Not that I blamed him. He warned me, and I ignored him. What was he supposed to say now? I told you so didn't feel necessary. Delisa Keller, the closest thing I had to a friend there, tried to get me to talk about it once. She caught me in the break room, leaning against the counter like I was holding myself up. "You okay?" she asked. The way she looked at me made it clear she already knew the answer. "I'm fine." "You're not." She crossed her arms, waiting for me to say more. But I didn't. I just grabbed my coffee and walked out. Because how do you explain something like this? How do you make it make sense to someone who wasn't there, who didn't feel it the way you did? I kept telling myself it was over, but it didn't feel over. Not completely. And then, out of nowhere, she texted me. It was short. Just 3 words. "I miss you." I stared at my phone so long the screen went dark. I told myself not to answer. That this was exactly what I'd been afraid of. But my fingers had a mind of their own. "I miss you too." And just like that, I was back in it. We didn't see each other right away. At first, it was just texts, short, careful, like we were both testing the waters. But it didn't take long before we fell into old habits. Late night snaps. Compliments. Flirty comments. She wanted to meet up. I told her no. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew what would happen if we did. I'd already burned one bridge. I couldn't handle setting another one on fire. But the more we talked, the harder it got to resist. The night we finally saw each other again, I told myself it was just to talk. Just to get closure. But the second I saw her standing there, nervous, fidgeting, biting her lip like she always did when she wasn't sure what to say, I knew there wouldn't be any closure. We didn't even make it through dinner before we ended up in her car. And this time? We didn't stop. After that, it was like I couldn't stop. I kept telling myself it was the last time, that I'd get it out of my system and move on. But I never did. Elle started talking about leaving her girlfriend. I didn't know if she meant it or if it was just something she said to make me feel better. But I let myself believe it, because it made everything easier. Except it didn't. I thought sneaking around was hard when we worked together. But this? This was worse. Every time my phone buzzed, I panicked. Every time I saw someone I knew when we were out, my stomach dropped. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then it did. Elle's girlfriend found out. I don't know how, maybe she saw the texts, maybe Elle slipped up, but it didn't matter. The fallout was fast and brutal. Elle tried to explain, but it didn't help. It just made everything worse. I thought she'd come to me afterward. That we'd figure it out together. But instead, she pulled away completely. I can't do this anymore, she said. I need time. And just like that, she was gone. Again. I'd never felt so stupid in my life. I let myself believe this was more than it was, more than just an escape for both of us. And in the end, I was left with nothing. I didn't hear from Elle for weeks after she ended things. At first, I told myself it was for the best, that this was the clean break I needed to get my life back on track. But the truth? I hated every second of it. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a text, a snap, anything. But it never came. I replayed everything in my head over and over. Every look, every touch, every word she'd said. I tried to convince myself that it meant something, that it wasn't just an affair. But the more time passed, the harder it was to believe that. And the worst part? I didn't know if I wanted to move on. Work felt empty without her. I'd catch myself glancing toward her office, half expecting to see her sitting there. But the door stayed closed, and the new admin who replaced her didn't even come close to filling the space she left behind. Nico kept his distance. Delisa stopped asking questions. People stopped whispering. Life moved on, except I didn't. One night, I finally broke down and texted her. I can't stop thinking about you. I stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots to pop up. They didn't. An hour later, I sent another message. Do you ever think about me? Still nothing. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't coming back. I spent the next few days in a fog, half working, half existing. It felt like everything I'd built, everything I'd convinced myself was real, had crumbled. But somewhere in that mess, I started asking myself the questions I'd been avoiding. Why did I let myself fall for someone I couldn't have? Why did I keep chasing things that weren't good for me? And why did I keep pretending I was okay when I wasn't? I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time, I was ready to start looking for them. I started small. I deleted her number first. Then the messages. Then the pictures. I told myself I wouldn't check her Snapchat story anymore, and for the most part, I stuck to it. I talked to Delisa, really talked to her. Told her more than I probably should have, but it felt good to finally say it out loud. She didn't judge me. She just listened. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. Finley reached out again. He wanted to grab coffee and catch up, but I turned him down. Not because I didn't miss him, I did, but because I knew going back wouldn't fix anything. It never does. Instead, I focused on work. On myself. On figuring out who I was when I wasn't tied to someone else. It wasn't easy. Some days, I still woke up expecting a text from Elle. And some nights, I still caught myself staring at her name in my contacts, wondering what would happen if I reached out. But I didn't. Because I knew it wouldn't change anything. The last time I saw her was at the grocery store. She didn't see me, at least, I don't think she did. She looked good. Happy. Like she'd finally let go of everything that happened. And maybe that's what I needed to do too. I'm not proud of what I did. But I'm not pretending it didn't happen either. It happened, and it changed me. It forced me to see parts of myself I didn't like. Parts one still need to work on. I'm not there yet. But I'm getting closer. I don't know how to fix this. I'm not even sure if it can be fixed. That's why I'm telling my story, because maybe someone out there has a perspective I haven't considered. Maybe you can help me figure out a way to untangle this mess before it's too late. So if you have any advice, if you faced something like this or know someone who has, I'd really like to hear from you. And if nothing else, let this be a lesson. Loneliness can lead you down paths you never expected to take. Don't let yourself drift so far that you can't find your way back. Pay attention before things unravel, because once you step over that line, there's no undoing it. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Your thoughts matter, so feel free to share them.